I think as we move in, regardless of who's in office, we know that we have a really solid set of policies that have been developed from the ground up. And we go out, we listen to our members, we listen to landowners, we get an understanding of what it is that is really driving their needs.
Hello, welcome everyone. We are so excited to welcome you to the first Western Landowners Policy Talk. I'm Louis Wertz, your host and communications director at the Western Landowners Alliance. And okay, with that, I will now introduce our two panelists and wave goodbye to Danny, who's our membership director. And if you have questions about membership, she's the person to reach out to. But I'm joined today on the call by Jason Fearneyhough, the Chief Policy Officer at Western Landowners Alliance. Jason's been with the team for about 6 months now. Jason, I would love, we've had a couple opportunities via email and stuff with members to introduce you, but I'd love for you to take a minute just to introduce yourself, talk about your background, and so we can start from that perspective.
Okay. Thank you, Louis, very much. And welcome everybody. I'm excited that we have this opportunity to visit today. My background, I'm number one, I'm so excited to be with Western Landowners Alliance and doing wonderful things with this wonderful organization. Immediate prior to this position, I was in Texas. I was working as the Deputy Commissioner of Agriculture there. And prior to that, I was the Director of Agriculture for the state of Wyoming. Leading up to those two positions, I have a 20-year career dealing with natural resource issues and agriculture issues too, but more importantly, natural resource in the background, anywhere from years and years ago, starting out in Washington, D.C., having an opportunity to work natural resource policy with the Honorable Craig Thomas at the time in his function as a House member back there. And that led me into a lifelong professional engagement with natural resources. I've done some things with consulting in Western Wyoming and run some natural resource programs, have been on boards statewide to work on those issues. And I'm hopeful that all of my background is something that is applicable here and will help Western landowners continue growing the great work that we've done in the past. So Louis, thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. It's been 6 months, but you've really jumped in and grabbed the reins of the policy program. And so it's super exciting to have that leadership. But I'm also delighted now to introduce somebody who most of our members are familiar with, but who is very familiar with the history of WLA's policy work. She's been involved with the organization since its founding, our CEO, Lesli Allison. Hi, Lesli.
Hi, it's wonderful to be here and be part of this first episode, and I'm so excited to have Jason on board.
Great. It's really exciting to do this. We've been working as a team to figure out what the best way to bring our policy concerns, the work we're doing in the policy program, to our members. So I'm really excited to kick this off, to have an interesting conversation. And it's an interesting time to have this first conversation because there's a lot of unprecedented stuff going on in our politics right now. We just finished a Supreme Court session that was a lot of precedent was overturned. We've got national elections going on, lots of campaigning going on, lots of political messaging out there. So maybe that's a good place to start with just some national context for our policy positions, where and how that affects the way that WLA is doing policy work. Jason, these are challenging times, but every challenge is an opportunity, right?
Absolutely, Louis. You mentioned a couple of them there. As we look in these unprecedented times moving forward, coming into this fall, we know for a fact that we're going to have a new administration that is taking the reins over in Washington. We don't know who that's going to be yet, obviously. Both houses of Congress are in play, which is not always the case. Technically it is, but this time around, it really seems like there is a lot of question as to who's going to be leading each of those houses, which is important. And as you mentioned, not just real recently, but certainly the Chevron case, overturning the Chevron deference. But in the last year and a half, there's been so much that has happened in the Supreme Court. And all of these things are going to affect how natural resource policy is managed from the federal level, which gives us a really big opportunity to engage and make sure that we push our needs for our membership forward and for WLA's perspective. We're from a good place. We come with solid policies and we have with solid needs, which is a good place to start for sure.
Yeah, no, I'll jump in here too. I think there's also some other positives ahead. A lot of people really feel like we're in a very perilous moment. We've got tension and conflict around the country and around the globe that's increasingly intense. At home, it feels like we've lost a sense of shared vision about who we are as a nation. And we seem to have gone beyond the information age into the disinformation age. And that is profoundly disorienting. But once you step back away from the 24/7 news cycles and then social media feeds, and you actually start talking to real people, things can look really different. And I do a lot of traveling around the West and talking to people out on the ground. And I consistently find that people share a deep concern about the growing divides in this country and a hunger for what many people call common sense or common ground, constructive solutions. And I find this is true regardless of people's political affiliation. I think there's an appetite, a hunger, and a willingness out there in the real world for the solutions that will carry us forward and give that next generation a really positive future in these landscapes.
Yeah, thanks, Lesli. I wonder, Jason, as you think about that, if there's something we're working on at the federal or congressional level that kind of epitomizes that common ground, constructive solution making, and an example from our portfolio of policy projects right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that real quick, I don't want to touch on this with what Lesli just mentioned, because I do think that it's one of the things that makes WLA so unique is the fact that Lesli and I've talked about this. It's like bringing policy to life. When we have leadership that is out there really touching base with people and understanding things at that deep of a level and understanding what's driving things, it really changes how we approach policy and it impacts it for sure. So I'm so grateful to be a part of that, and it's exciting. But to answer your question, one thing that we bring up and that we're working on and have for a long time is the idea of flexibility with accountability, especially dealing with operational grazing. Right now, there's a bill that has been introduced by Senator Barrasso from Wyoming, but it is also co-sponsored by Senator Wyden from Oregon that's addressing that idea of flexibility in grazing. And it is, as you can tell, probably just from the two places these gentlemen are from, that they may not come from the same political spectrum. And that's something, kind of touching back on what Lesli said, it puts us in a comfort zone to be able to work with both sides of the aisle on so many things. And this is one of those places where we're excited that it's moved forward, but it's a concept that WLA has been working with for quite a while. Let's figure out ways to have the tools that are needed to let people be on the ground, do what they do, and do it in a very proactive and positive way. So that's one thing that we're working on that comes right to mind, Louis.
Right. And it's a great example. As Jason said, that's something we've supported for a very long time. There's no debate about the importance of ensuring that our federal lands are healthy and productive. What we're talking about with this is really providing producers with the flexibility to practice adaptive management so that they can achieve the outcomes to which the public holds them accountable, to which they can hold themselves accountable. And these lands are dynamic living systems, and our science and our understanding and the practices around grazing continue to evolve as we learn. And climate and other environmental conditions are always changing. And a good manager takes all these things into account and adapts accordingly. Rigid management prescriptions, on the other hand, are a recipe for failure. And we really feel like it's time to remove the outdated straitjackets that limit producers' ability to manage appropriately. And we can do that without abandoning accountability by focusing on targeted outcomes. So we're excited to see this legislation moving forward.
Yeah, and I just noted that it looks like earlier this week, that a companion bill was introduced in the House. So it continues to move forward, and we're continuing to engage with all of those stakeholders on it. So that's exciting. And flexibility of accountability is something, people shorthand with, it's not the cow, it's the how. That obviously applies across private and public land. But I think maybe it's a good opportunity to just step back to the sort of macro opportunity again, before we get too deep in the weeds, and talk about administration change one way or the other that Jason mentioned. and how we might be specifically preparing for that, since so much of this policy is happening at this sort of federal nexus. Jason, how's the policy program sort of work when things are as up in the air as they are now?
It's a really good and viable question, Louis. I mean, I think as we move in, regardless of who's in office, we know that we have a really solid set of policies that have been developed from the ground up. We go out, we listen to our members, we listen to landowners, we get an understanding of what it is that is really driving their needs. What are their needs? So that's the very first thing, is make sure that you understand what we are expected to do, what is needed out there to help our producers, our landowners, our membership, all of that, to continue doing what they're doing. We have to look and make sure that it touches all of our, as we call mountains, which are the economic viability of working lands, the water resource availability, forest and rangeland health, wildlife conservation and management. That's the structure that we bring to that. So if you have really solid sets of policy from an angle that we have, which is trying to come up with pragmatic, positive solutions for people to do what they do and protect the resource, it doesn't really matter who's in office from that standpoint. The technical part of that is absolutely, we know that there's going to be transition teams that are coming into play, and that is at the executive level. It also happens to some extent when people change, membership in Congress. So you have those that we all need to be in touch with. We'll be working with those folks as they come in and into place to make sure that they understand what the needs of our landowners and our members are. And then, we figure out the ways to work forward with them. What are their priorities and how can we align those where we can? And there'll be places where maybe we can't, and we accept that too. But that's a quick overview of how we move forward, and it all starts right there on the ground.
And I think regardless of which party, which administration comes in, it's really impossible to overstate the importance of working lands and natural resources. I mean, we all depend on those. They're foundational to national security, to public well-being, to ecological outcomes. And yet in an urbanized world, people, including our political leadership on both sides of the aisle, can lose sight of this. And so as a new administration takes office, we want to ensure that the health and future of working lands is at the very top of their radar, and to be able to provide specific recommendations that will have broad support that they can run with.
Cool. Yeah. So there's obviously some specifics that we are working on, and that are those policies that Jason referenced that have been vetted and come from the ground up. I wonder if we could talk about some of those specifics now, Jason. And I'm thinking specifically of changes to the federal farm bill, which is a 5-year on a sort of typically has been on a 5-year cycle. We're starting to stretch the limits of that. But yeah, we have some specifics there that we're working on. And I wonder if you could help people understand.
First and foremost, obviously, yes, we need a passage of a new farm bill. It will be interesting to see how that happens. It's always hard to prognosticate these things, because the minute you throw out hey, I think this is going to happen, something different happens. But right now it would appear that depending on what happens in a variety of races on the congressional side, that we may not have a farm bill until maybe next year. And we are constantly asking them to get one in place. Much more important, though, than it being quick, we want it to be good and make sure that has the impacts that we need it to have where we need it to be. In specifics, of course, we are very concerned with conservation title of the Farm Bill for, I think, obvious reasons, and where we play and where we are interacting with our membership and Congress. The conservation portion is incredibly important. We've spent a lot of time and worked with a lot of partners to make sure that we have the things necessary in that conservation title and to move forward positive things. We've had a program that we've been working on that I think Lesli is going to talk about. I hope she does, on trying to be able to utilize some programs that have been in existence, rearrange some of those programs so that they can be in a better format for our folks, and then be able to utilize them together in Grassland CRP, the Grasslands Conservation Reserve Program. I think there's a good opportunity to continue to do some good work there. So that's one real specific thing that we have spent a great deal of effort on. And I think it's one that is highly positive use of our valuable time, I think.
Yeah. Lesli, do you want to fill people in on the changes we helped make in the 2018 Farm Bill related to grassland conservation reserve program, and then what the implications of those have been and why we're so focused on it for 2023, 4, 5 Farm Bill, whatever it is?
Sure. This is one of the biggest federal programs out there, very popular with producers. It makes payments on an annual basis for basically grazing management and practices that help sustain grazing operations and also grassland habitats, including specific things like big game migrations and critical habitat needs for big game. So what it really does is it recognizes the values that well-managed working lands are already bringing to the landscape and helps compensate for the costs that producers incur in sustaining those habitats and wildlife populations. And one of the biggest changes that we helped do in the 2018 Farm Bill was to make that more applicable to grassland habitats in the West. It had been constrained a little bit, limiting it more to sort of the Midwest. So we were able to help expand that. And then that became a key to the success in what we call the USDA Wyoming Big Game Migration Partnership that has helped sustain the elk migrations in and out of Yellowstone National Park, for example, and the working lands that really support those migrations, often at a pretty significant cost. Habitat leasing is another way to think about the grassland CRP and the way these programs work. And habitat leasing is an idea that really came forward from the landowner community that we've carried into policy and into this big game partnership. And the success has been tremendous. There's more demand than we've got funding available. The USDA built on the success of that to expand it into Montana and Idaho with additional funding commitments this year. And we see this as a really important tool, particularly habitat leasing, for sustaining working lands and the wildlife that they support. And in the new Farm Bill, we're working to secure expanded funding to improve program delivery and to enable producers to stack programs to meet different concurrent resource needs. And we're encouraged by the momentum that we're seeing in that area.
Yeah, I'll step in and just back it out here. That stacking specifically is around the environmental quality incentives program, right? And that's one of the most popular programs for specific habitat improvements on farms and ranches around the country. It's a cost share program where producers bring forward some of their own resources, and then they can get things like fencing improvements or weed management or things like that paid for. And what we've been able to do, is my understanding, is through the Big Game Partnership, allow producers to access both those habitat improvement funds and this habitat lease payment under the Grasslands Conservation Reserve Program. And now that's expanding to Idaho and Montana, but the question is, why can't it just be a national opportunity? And those are the conversations we're having with the principals in the Farm Bill negotiations, is my understanding.
Right. Yeah. Just to underscore, these are meeting different resource needs. One is managing grazing to accommodate the forage needs, habitat needs of wildlife. Another one is to deal with things like wildlife-friendly fencing or noxious weed treatments, different resource needs. We need both of those things out there for this to work together.
And with that, I think, the thing that is, again, going back to this idea of, bringing policy to life and working at different levels, as Lesli spelled out there, when you think of what that took, you have multiple states that are in play. You have a federal agency that's run by the executive branch that basically, it took some work from WLA, and this is prior to my time, certainly, but from WLA and others to really help them understand that maybe they could look at some things a little differently within their current programs. And then once they came through that, maybe see where they might need some help. So you're working at the agency level, and that's so vital as well to build those partnerships and things that happen to make things happen that we need. And then you take a program that is proven itself, and now you're going back to Congress and saying, hey, let's codify this. So there's been a lot of work that was done coming up here, and I just commend WLA for everything they did. And again, prior to me coming on board, so kudos on that. It's fantastic to bring a popular program and make it even better.
Thanks, Jason. And yeah, Lesli gets a lot of credit for that, and all of our team. And it has been a process for sure. This is not the sort of stuff that happens overnight. It's a good reminder. Another thing that is on the minds of a ton of people around the West right now, and that crosses over into this policy space that, of course, we're paying attention to, is water and the ongoing drought in the West, this 1,000-year drought we're dealing with, the implications of changes to the way that the compacts that affect the West are really critical. But there's also a lot of talk about paying water rights holders to use less water in the context of this mega drought. And also a lot of concern from people on the land that we hear all the time, and recognize that there are impacts when you decrease water use in one area to agriculture, to rural economies, to the landscape. What's our general approach to that challenge? And then maybe we can get into some of the specifics after we lay out like how we're thinking about that.
So general approach to the challenges, I mean, first off, we need to recognize that we're absolutely dealing with less water. I think that is, the science bears that out for sure. On top of that, we have more people that have moved into the West. So you have a system that's already over allocated, even if it wasn't at the beginning. I mean, and I think that goes for water throughout the West. And you have more pressure that's coming on that. So you have to understand that dynamic. And you also have to understand that we are dealing with, I guess, tools that have been in place for a very long time that were there for a very specific reason. And they have done very positive things and continue to in order to manage that water. So I guess as far as an approach, it is making sure we understand there are a lot of people that are involved in this and from a lot of different walks of life. And then it's how do we work forward together to come into solutions that are very valuable for and viable as we move forward in a changing West from a lot of perspectives. So there is that we really have to know. We have to understand the parameters, and then we can build how we're going to move forward. And I have some things I can get into here, but I do want to stop here and ask Lesli if there's something she would like to add to that before I continue, because this is, I mean, water's the lifeblood of the West, obviously.
Thank you, Jason. And I think you're covering it well. I think that the water is so challenging, and each landscape is different. And so a lot of the focus we feel like needs to be on what's the process by which we arrive at solutions, who's engaged, are these solutions, appropriate for any given landscape? Now, in some levels, you really do have to go large scale, regional, and have the appropriate stakeholders involved. But yet there's a really important place for locally driven solutions, customized solutions to the landscape that are collaboratively developed. So, this is one of those cases where when you bring the right people in the room, you can see the problem in front of you, you come together in thoughtful dialogue, surprising solutions sometimes emerge from that process. And so we want to create that opportunity, first and foremost. We don't want to come in with ideological stuff. We don't want to come in with black and white ideas about how this should be handled. This is not a urban versus rural. All people need water. It's our food on our plates. It's the water in our taps. It's so many things to all of us that we all need to be engaged in the most thoughtful way possible. And landowners really hold a central place in that conversation, and they need to be engaged in the right way. And that's really, I would say, the focus of our efforts in the beginning of this water program that we've launched.
So, WLA did do a survey last year, water survey, and it became clear that first off, landowners need more information about water issues and policies and resources. So we are continually working to get that information and those resources out to the landowner community. But part of that information comes from the landowner community, right? A good portion of it. We're out there, done the survey, continuing to have conversations and dialogues with how that works. As Lesli mentioned, the best solutions are developed collaboratively as we figure out what the needs are and how we get to those solutions. And so we can and will and are moving forward in collaborative processes to work on those solutions. One of the things that we do know in a changing West is that we need flexibility, to manage and conserve water, and also protecting, water rights that exist for people that own them currently. I think as you look where there's critical water shortages in ag water use, it becomes unavoidable. We have differences of opinion, obviously, even within an ag community as you look down there, because people use water differently. And it becomes incredibly important to have those conversations moving forward. And I think, as Lesli mentioned, how do you get landowners together and get that dialogue on the table where solutions can be found from the landowners themselves? I think it's so vitally important. But it's something that we have to continue to work on, because from my perspective, we are truly tasked with helping to maintain resilient systems, whether that's forest, whether that's range, whether that's agriculture, all touching water and providing water for human use as well. So, and this is something, it's not just surface water. Groundwater is becoming an ever more present issue in discussions as well, and rightfully so.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, and key topic, so much going on there. I think it's fair to say that we will almost certainly come back to a more in-depth water conversation on a future episode, because there's just so many different things to untangle. We haven't even touched on the wetlands change from the Supreme Court, the Wotus-Sackett decision, and the implications that has. There's a lot to unwind, and a lot of policy on water is set at the state level. And so there's 11 states in the West, plus, there's lots of places where things are moving there. So there'll always be tons to dig into. Yeah. I don't know, Lesli, anything to add there?
No, I think we can move on. Should we circle back to a question that's in the Q&A, or do you want to answer those at the end?
No, I think it's just fine. If you want to get to a question in the Q&A, we can deal with it right now.
Okay, great. So I'm circling back to the grasslands. Ted Cook has asked the question: grasslands are the most threatened ecosystem on the continent, and grassland birds have declined more than any other ecosystem type. Ranching is declining along with them. What's good for the bird is good for their herd. Do we have evidence that these farm bill conservation programs can stop and reverse these declines? If not, what else do we need to do? So I think it is a great question. Measuring the efficacy of these programs is an important piece. And, responding specifically to grassland birds, I can't give you that answer, but I can tell you that in the Big Game Migration Partnership, we've been successful in seeing more than 61,000 acres enrolled in the Grassland Conservation Reserve Program in the priority big game migration areas. That's 61,000 acres that are now receiving annual habitat lease payments for habitat management, which makes those operations more financially viable in the long term, those 10 to 15-year contracts. So that's been successful, and that's just within the priority big game migration areas. There's much broader enrollment across the West in the country in that program with some of the changes that have been made. USDA also awarded $11 million in equip contracts representing over 300,000 acres of conservation. And again, now the program has been expanded to Montana and Idaho with additional commitments. So we are seeing, and in New Mexico, for example, there's been huge record-breaking enrollments in this program as well, and that is in the lesser prairie chicken priority country. So we're seeing a great response. And so that is one indicator that at least they're effective to some level. But I think more evaluation will absolutely be appropriate.
Yeah. Thanks, Lesli. I would just venture to say that it's fair to say that there will be other things we need to do, that program, federal farm bill programs, conservation programs on their own are not going to be enough. And we are actively working on all non-federal, public-private partnership programs for habitat conservation, right? Habitat lease models that don't require federal programs. That's something we're always exploring. And then, we're working in the Southern Great Plains on, actually doing that monitoring too. So answering these questions is also part of our work. We're just not talking about it quite as much today on the policy call, but for sure, as Lesli says, we've got to pay close attention to how effective these programs are and make sure we're using all of the possible tools.
And I agree. I think it's a tool in the toolbox, right? I mean, we need all those tools to make that positive impact, which is great.
To the question about grassland birds, it prompts my next question, and it moves us into territory thinking a little bit more about wildlife policy issues and what we're working on there. And when you think about wildlife conservation, species conservation, one of the first things that comes to mind in terms of policy is the Endangered Species Act. And I know we have been the implications of that act and the way that we implement it are such a key part of reality for so many landowners, and because there are species of concern all over the West. I wonder if we wanted to just dive into one of the big issues that we're working on right now, which is related to that, which is the maybe imminent listing of pollinators, Western pollinators under the Endangered Species Act. And if that just could serve as an entryway into the way that we think about this sort of more broadly and how we've been engaged on those issues.
Sure. Endangered Species Act is a very broad topic, and bringing it down to pollinators is appropriate. And I think I'd like to talk about a couple other things. In my history, in my experience, I had the opportunity to work on the sage-grouse issues for many years and in a variety of capacities in Wyoming as they were going through that proposed listing process and now continue to as things come up and we relook at all of those. At the time, in my mind, when that all started, however many years ago, I said, as did many others, that this has such a massive implication, this one species across the West, because it touched so many states and a very large set of eco throughout the sage-grouse steppe. It had whatever happened, it was going to be big. And I think, you saw so many states, at least 7, that really put in a lot of investment, time, energy, money, dedicated people to enhance habitat, to make sure we knew how much habitat was there, what was going on, the numbers of the birds, learned things about those birds that we never knew. And all in an effort to make a better plan moving forward. And it was all really vital, but it was driven by the fact, in my mind, that there was such an impact on so many different people. I really thought that was the precedent that was going to set. As we look at pollinators now and the potential for listings of those, I think it could dwarf what the greater sage-grouse kind of approach looked like, from the standpoint of it affects more states, it affects so many people. We know very little about lots of these pollinators and their habitats, and therefore, how do we go about moving forward in a positive way? So from WLA's standpoint, there has been already a lot of effort to work on this space, to get things that are in place where landowners could feel confident that if we went and actually monitored to see what does exist, because I think one of the first questions is, do we know how many of these critters there are? Do we have access everywhere we would need to look and see where those are? And I think the answer is probably no. We don't know what the real numbers are in order to do that. But in order to help landowners move forward and monitor to see if there's something on their place that could add to those numbers in the pollinator space, you've got to have an assurance, so to speak, to be able to move forward that, hey, if I'm doing the right thing, nothing's going to happen. And I'd like to say that's common sense, and it is common sense, but it's not necessarily how it always works. So WLA has worked very hard in that space and will continue to try and work with agencies and landowners to have a way to count where we are so we know where we have to go with the plan. I think it's vital that we do that. And there too, Lesli has done a lot of work in this area. I'd really like her to talk about that if she wouldn't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Jason, you've covered it fairly well. I mean, a couple of things. One is we really can't make informed decisions about listing of species, about conservation actions that species may need, about any of that, if we don't have the participation of private landowners and the contributions of data from private lands. But that has got to be done in a way that respects data privacy for landowners and provides those regulatory assurances that landowners need, that they need to know that in exchange for cooperation, whether it's data sharing or conservation investment into conserving and recovering species, they're not going to be shut down, run out of business, overregulated. Their life isn't going to get harder because they cooperate. Their life needs to get easier because they cooperate. And we have those tools in existence, but they're not accessible. And there's no real funding source to support them. And these are things that we've been working on since, for at least a decade now. And we are making steady progress. We've got some changes in Fish and Wildlife Service policy. We've got some changes in available funding to support these. We're currently working on a draft regulatory assurance agreement. We're looking hard at data collection and sharing opportunities where landowners can really step forward and be part of the solution and be supported in doing that. So a lot of good work to be done there that benefits both the landowners and the wildlife species. And I want to call out too, there's a movement afoot. It's got even an organization now named behind it that we've been, core partner in from early on. And it's called Conservation Without Conflict. And, it's a recognition that we can solve these problems working together collaboratively. When we invest our energies in that direction, amazing solutions come out. When we continue to invest in, as a society, in the litigious adversarial approaches to these things, the outcomes are just not as good. You might stop a species from going extinct, but it's going to dangle there on the threshold of extinction forever, because it does take a willing landowner community to help bring these species back. We've got to work together.
Thanks. Yeah, that is the key point. Jason connected the pollinator issue to has such a West-wide impact. A lot of these regulatory assurance agreements, the models for them, though, some species, their range is much smaller than pollinators, so the impact of the one issue is not so broad. But that model for how to approach this is broadly applicable, and that's the part that I think is so exciting. If we crack this nut, we have an opportunity with the pollinator issue to make an impact hugely West-wide. Same with the sage grouse. But the model of partnering with landowners and making these agreements more accessible, providing tools alongside them, that is repeatable, even if the species is only located in southern Arizona or northern California. Another set of species of concern that we work on regularly, have been in the news, are always in the news, but are predators, wolves and grizzly bears especially. Their populations can continue to recover. We don't often hear. One of my personal communications director pet peeves is that this isn't their success story. The news about them is so often a kind of sad story of conflict rather than a success story of we recovered these amazing iconic species in the lower 48 in ways we couldn't have imagined 50 years ago. It's an incredible success that there are so many wolves and grizzly bears back in their former habitat, and that range continues to grow. And with that growth comes new conflicts at the sort of leading edge of their habitat and increased conflict around the West. And I know we're working on a lot of different angles on that, both at the state level and at the federal level. I wonder if, Jason, you could talk a little bit about the ways that we're approaching helping producers survive in that context, and then and ways we're trying to help states manage as they face recovering carnivore populations.
Sure. I think that there's a lot of different efforts that are going on. As you look to reduce conflict, one of the things that is always out there is, okay, how do you pay to help reduce conflict, right? What are the tools that are available? How do we afford them? So you start there and you start looking at opportunities. There's USDA cost share for RCPPs, and as we're live here, I'm like drawing a blank brain on what the RCPPs mean, but I know the acronym. So, but basically you're looking for dollars to put in practices that help reduce conflict. And there are things like, these all have different titles for different reasons, but basically you're looking at the idea of range riders and carcass removals and those types of things to help reduce the number of deals out there. But groups of people coming together to make sure we have those opportunities. We look federally for more funding to do those types of things. The ACE Act, which is, the American Conservation Enhancement Act, right now that is moving through. So we have very actively been working to make sure that funding not only exists, but hopefully is increased in the opportunity or in these areas for opportunity to reduce conflict. Right now, just so everyone knows, the Senate has actually, in their version, has increased the dollar amount, and the House is rolling their forward with the old dollar amounts. That's going through the process. We'll see where it ends up. Obviously, we hope that there is more money available because I think it is vital if we want to help these species continue to grow and recover, that there is opportunity for the people, the landowners, the people who make their living out there, to have tools available to help do so. On a statewide level, a quick example in Idaho, they're moving forward a depredation fund to help, if there is a taking of livestock by one of these species, then you have an opportunity at the state level to be compensated for that. I don't believe that they are at their final space where we know how that is exactly going to work. They're still going through their rulemaking process, I believe. But there's other states out there that have done similar things and are having conversations. It's not just gray wolves or Canadian gray wolves, it's Mexican gray wolves and grizzlies and some other things too. So a lot of opportunity. And again, Lesli is there. I know you're down there in the heart of Mexican gray wolf country. How have you seen things play out there?
That's a great question. I would just like to say, this is one of the areas of our work I'm most proud of. We've had a very robust effort going on for a number of years, engaging people all over the West in solutions and intensive research, figuring this out. It's producer-led. We're trying to be very realistic about what producers are experiencing on the ground. The result of all that work has been, again, a body of research supporting cost share practices that help reduce those conflicts. That is a game changer because those conflict reduction practices, particularly something like range riding, can be very expensive for the producer. And the producers are not in a position typically to afford what's being asked of them in these shared landscapes with expanding predator populations. So having that public cost share to support the public wildlife, the expansion of the predators, a really key element. And we're seeing that now. $22 million awarded under 2 different RCPPs that we're a partner in over five different states. Starts hitting ground later this year directly to producers and RCPP Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Anyway, so that is moving forward. We have staff on the ground already doing outreach for that. So, that's something real in action, but there are some big conflicts still out there. The way in which Wildlife Services, confirms depredations has shifted a little bit. It's creating a lot of angst. We need to get to better resolution about how we, recognize predator depredation and compensate producers for that so that people can stay whole in these shared landscapes that are both important to people and wildlife.
Yeah. And I think it's, maybe the members on this call already know this, but I think it's important to reiterate that so much of the conservation success story around these species is that we have viable working lands, private open space that provides critical habitat and connectivity between the places where these species were reintroduced, Yellowstone, the Northern Continental Divide ecosystem. The spaces between those protected areas are private land. A lot of critical migration corridors for these species are on private land. And if we can't keep those ranches whole and healthy, there's a lot of people who would love to live in large homes with and not make space for grizzly bears right between Yellowstone and Glacier National Park. We saw that in 2020 during the pandemic with a huge, crazy influx of people moving to Montana, Wyoming, these states. That demand is not going down for this real estate. And if we're serious about protecting the habitat for these creatures as the public, then investing in making sure that those ranches stay whole is the critical bottom line, right? So it's the tools to keep a livestock operation going in the context of wolves and grizzly bears, but underneath it all is that we just can't have those ranches be forced to sell into the development pressure that they're already facing. And that's the economic tools that we're working on all the time across all of the policy levers that we're trying to pull. And I think that sort of points to some of the strategy that we've had at the state level, which is, another set of policy and economic tools are these state trust funds. And I think Lesli has worked for so long, and we just had a major success this past legislative session in the spring in New Mexico on a trust fund there that's modeled on something in Wyoming. So I think I'll start with you, Lesli. Could you explain what that model is and why that particular approach is so important to us?
Absolutely. I think it starts with a philosophical premise, right? Which is that the health of these landscapes and wildlife populations and agricultural working lands is really something that has to be supported by society as a whole. It's not something that should fall solely on the backs of a landowner in an already very, economically marginal enterprise. It's not something that falls entirely on the states. We have federal lands, we have federally managed wildlife species, we have federal national food and security issues associated with this. There's a federal component, there's a state component, there is a private industry component, there is a conservation community component. And so the idea of these trust funds is you blend these things together. You blend public and private dollars together. Everybody chips in to lift this burden, right? And that's really the idea behind these trust funds. And the other really important thing about the trust funds is that these are endowments that are invested, and then the interest generated year after year supports good work on these landscapes, watershed restorations, and all these kinds of things. Why that's important is that when you're doing large landscape restoration work, these are large, complex, multi-year projects. They're expensive. They take a lot of partners. You cannot cobble these things together based on sporadic one-year appropriations, based on the legislative political cycles, 2 and 4 year political cycles, right? Now, all of that is very disruptive to sustained efforts to really bring the West where we need it to be. And so the trust fund is a way of investing in our economy, taking the proceeds from that investment and from the good economy and reinvesting it back into the resources that make economic life possible for us. And so you create a positive feedback loop that sits outside of these political cycles, that allows that long-term predictability that the funding is going to be there, that you can put together those partnerships, you can go out and seek that matching funding, and that's what's going to move these projects forward. So we think the trust fund is a really important model. It's used in places around the world. We started with looking at the Wyoming Wildlife and Natural Resource Trust Fund, which has been a tremendously successful model, but there are also other models around in different states, and we looked at all of those, brought those together in New Mexico, got a bunch of partners in collaboration in about 4 years. Some of it was hard work with partners, didn't always agree with one another, but we finally got there and found a structure that worked for New Mexico. And the legislature got behind it with the overwhelming bipartisan support, and governor signed it to, huge applause around the state. And it was something we could really celebrate. But $400 million now has been, invested in New Mexico's land and water future. We can find that bipartisan common ground, through those shared funding models and create that long-term stability and investment in our future. And so, we'd love to see those models replicated in other states.
Jason, I know we're actively working on doing that up in Idaho right now. I wonder if you wanted to update folks on just what that looks like.
Lesli just described it. It is working with partners and decision makers. It's just in a new place. The exciting things about all of these, though, is that every place is different. And so there's the nuances that you have to work with the local folks and what works for them and what model is going to work for them. So just actively engaged in that right now, Louis. I'm excited to move that forward, hopefully.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we put it out there that we were specifically working on it in Idaho. So if there's anyone from Idaho curious about that, like to get involved, reach out. We put you to work. So cool. And then, I think we're getting close to the top of the hour here, and I want to wrap up and respect everyone's time. But I know that, Lesli, you've been out traveling the West this summer, having lots of very interesting conversations with people from all walks of life, landowners with lots of different issues. And is there anything that's come up in those conversations? That I'm sure there's tons of things, but what sticks out to you that we haven't covered yet that people are raising and that we can just put a pin in and make sure we come back to future episodes?
There are a lot of issues on people's minds for sure, but the ones that really consistently top the list in most of my conversations are economics, long-term ranch viability, and then succession. And those two things go together. It's hard to convey the ranch to the next generation if it's not going to be economically viable, if it's going to be an economic drain on the family. And so that's really, I think, top of mind in managing succession, managing multiple heirs, many of whom are not, on the property or engaged in the property. That's a challenge for a lot of different families, every different scale, really. and then getting the economics right, looking to diversify income sources. People are looking at every possible opportunity, carbon markets, biodiversity credits, increased profitability from livestock grazing operations, hunting and fishing, guest ranching. People are really looking at the full spectrum of ways, energy development, that they can help keep these lands economically viable and then pass them down. And so another one that's really hot right now is property rights and public access. We have a lot of, clamor from sportsmen about public access to, impounded public lands and things like that. That's creating a lot of consternation. It does threaten the economic viability of a number of our ranch operations. So big issue out there. Elk management is becoming a near crisis and maybe already a crisis in many parts of the country. And energy development, the rapid pace of energy development, renewables right now, with all of the linear infrastructure and those developments posing challenges to other values on the landscape and other uses. Of course, wildfire is on everybody's mind right now in forest management as we see the West on fire in another really hot fire year. And then recreational impacts. Exploding recreation across public lands is pushing things like elk and predators down onto the private lands and penning them there. These wildlife are unable to move because they're literally living human fences on all sides of these private lands, really impacting wildlife movements. And we were learning more and more about noise and light pollution's effects on insects, for example, bats and birds and things like that. So, recreational management becoming a very big issue. And then finally, consistent conflicts over public land management, whether that's the BLM's conservation rule has been highly controversial, the Rock Springs, land use plan, Forest Service relations with landowners, very fractured in many cases. So those are the things I hear about from folks when I go out there.
Wow. I mean, those must be some interesting and meeting. I don't know how you ever end up leaving. Like, how do you get out the door? There's so much to talk about. That's how it feels right now. We're already at 1:00, but we could talk all day, and we do actually, just not broadcasting it all day, every day about these issues. So I think we'll conclude there. We did fortunately get to a couple of the Q&A questions live, which is awesome. I'm really glad that people submitted questions. Thank you. And I just invite our audience to stay engaged with us in between these conversations. Obviously, if you have an issue that's burning in your mind, something that's keeping you up at night, please let us know about it. We really are curious all the time to talk to landowners who have a resource management challenge, and especially when you've got a resource management solution proposal that you think could scale up. We'd love to hear from you. So this is just the start of that conversation in this format, but the conversation is ongoing. Please do reach out. Thank you so much, Jason and Lesli, for coming along with me to try this as a format for doing this. This was an excellent conversation. I'm really happy that we took the step to do this Western Landowners Policy Talk. And we will come back to a lot of those issues in future conversations. So thank you both so much. Thank you to our audience and to our members for making our work possible. And take care out there.
We're in a new chapter of conservation. In the first chapter of conservation in this country, you had wilderness and then you had city. But today, more and more, we understand that there's this very important piece in the middle that we call the working landscape.
That is Lesli Allison, CEO of the Western Landowners Alliance.
These are the places that provide our food, our fiber. They provide the jobs that sustain the rural communities. These things are incredibly important and they're disappearing. And that's really our next challenge going forward. We have to think beyond protected wilderness. And you can't do that unless you're engaging the people in those landscapes, first and foremost in that solution.
Led by the people on the ground, Western Landowners Alliance advances policies and practices that sustain working lands, connected landscapes, and native species.
What we're seeing in the West today is incredibly hopeful because you do see collaborations, working with partners, trying to realize this vision that's so important to us. I think many places in the rural West are actually leading the way on this.
And so can you. Join us and learn more at westernlandowners.org.